What is going on, everyone? Anthony Drew Gary here, host of the How To Show, where we talk about optimizing life, money, and happiness one how to at a time. And this is the first episode of 2024. If you are just joining me recently, I drop episodes each and every Wednesday. This week is no different, and we are having some fun this week. We are going to bring on a guest to talk about why it is important to get your estate together. What do I mean by estate? You'll find out soon. I'm not the expert on this one. I brought one in for you. And so we're going to bring in Jenny Rozelle to talk all things estate planning, and if you have not done this yet, why it may make sense for you to do so. So without further ado, let's switch over. Jenny Rozelle, welcome to the How To Show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. And before we get started, I want to give a little shout out to Hamilton County Leadership Academy. It's a program that both of us are running through this year's cohort. And absent that program, I don't think I would have met Jenny. So this is a cool opportunity to plug them and get ourselves started in a conversation about why it is important to get your estate together. This video is coming out at the first of the new year, and maybe it's on your goals to get this a little bit cleaned up. And I'm not an expert in this world, but thankfully I've met folks who are. And so to give Jenny an opportunity to introduce yourself, what have you been doing the last handful of years? What makes you the right person to talk about this? What's your experience level?
Yeah. I love that you said, adding it to the to-do list because that is definitely something that a lot of people will add it to the to-do list and then uh, not get to it. So, encourage people to put it on the to-do list and act on it. So, my name is Jenny Rozelle. I am an estate and elder law attorney in the state of Indiana. Have a few different office locations throughout the state. To specifically answer your question, Anthony, I think that it kind of goes to one of my little pet peeves, that in law school with lawyers, we don't technically have to, declare a specialty or that's why there are attorneys that do varying levels of different practice areas. So I have chosen to specifically help in the estate planning, elder law, and estate administration space. I've been in the field for, I guess January will be year number 12. And I actually own my law firm. So not only am I the attorney, I'm also the owner. And I think I'm one of those people that I'm constantly shouting from the rooftops about this field. And I know you wanted me to give a cheap plug to my own podcast, which is Legal Tea, TEA. So if this episode inspires anyone to learn, do a little bit more, education for themselves, I talk a lot about this field, this topic on my podcast, which is available on basically every major podcast platform.
Yeah, and there will be links to that in the show notes for this episode for sure. So be sure to check out Jenny on Legal Tea. But when we start to talk about the word estate, I feel like it can scare people.
For
I
sure.
don't have an estate. I don't have an estate. I don't have a gated entrance to my house. I don't have a drawbridge that separates me from everybody else. Can you help guide some of the misconceptions there and explain, in a general sense, what is an estate?
An estate is if you even have one penny in your bank account, you have an estate. But you're so right. People hear that word and they think it's much bigger than it really is. People, I don't have a drawbridge. I don't have, I'm not behind some fancy, gate either. Um, and I would actually say most of my clients are very average folks that they actually are not, super, super, super high net worth, but they also see the value in making sure they get, their legal affairs in order. So, an estate is just a really fancy word for any type of asset that you have and totaling up all those assets. So, whether you have, you know, a house, whether you have a bank account, whether you have both, whether you have more than all of that, if you have anything in your name, that is considered an estate.
Got it. And so the supposition in this episode is the unfortunate circumstance where you pass away. And
Yep.
so we want to talk about this in a sense of what legally happens when someone dies and someone has those different things that you've put underneath the umbrella of an estate?
Yeah, it really, my quick answer to that question would be to always find an attorney like myself to like help jumpstart on like what you should be doing. Because that question is really difficult because it really truly depends on not only the types of assets that are out there, how those assets are owned, as well as the values of those assets. That's really going to determine whether we have to go through a court process called probate, which we can get into if we have time,
Hmm?
or whether we have maybe some sort of trust involved where maybe we have assets owned by some sort of trust document. um or maybe you don't have either, right? Maybe you don't, maybe you're part of the 50% of people that choose not to do, or place the importance on doing some sort of estate planning venture. So it really depends on the type of assets and the documents that you have that really determines what path a family is going to go down. And the kind of silly little thing I always tell people is you can either, you know, pay someone like me, to get your affairs in order now and get things cleaned up with a bow on top, or your family can kind of clean things up later. It's probably going to be a more costly venture at that point because now we're playing cleanup. So even when people don't have any kind of estate plan, I help those kind of families all the time too. It just kind of depends on the assets and the values of those assets.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, and that's a good way to start that. I once heard it framed that, getting your estate planning in order is that one last opportunity to tell your family that you love them before you pass on into
Mm,
the next world. And that really hit me, and that was one of the guiding thoughts behind, I became a dad not that long ago. Ashley and I, we better get our stuff in order because we don't want to leave anybody with a mess. And I,
yeah.
I think that, people like you and I were growing, and a lot of our peers may find themselves in a situation where they unfortunately start to lose loved ones and they start to inherit messes along with maybe the tangible things that come along with it. And I think that the word that comes to mind that we haven't talked about yet is someone having a will or somebody not
Hmm.
having a will. Can we start on the elementary level of, what does that mean, and what ultimately happens if you do and you don't have that document in place?
Yeah, so a last will and testament is a document that, it means absolutely nothing until we pass away. And so you can think of families and friends that maybe they've updated their wills. It is whatever that last will is what's going to stand. So a last will and testament kicks into action after we pass away. And, I've seen wills be like 5 pages. I've seen them be like 50 pages. And even in those 50-page wills, wills really do two things. They do really, truly only do two things. They say who is in charge. So Indiana calls that role a personal representative or an executor. And then the second thing wills do is it says who gets my stuff. Whatever, whether I have the $5 in my checking account or I have 5 million bucks, who gets that $5 or that 5 million bucks, and in what manner do those beneficiaries inherit? So a will is, I love what you said, is your opportunity to give your family or your beneficiaries the gift of, putting your wishes in writing for what you want to have happen when you pass away. Um, Now, a big misconception about wills is a lot of people think wills control all your assets when you pass away. And that was really, when I was preparing for your and I's conversation today, that was really something I wanted to make sure I got out there was wills only apply to very specific types of assets. And those specific type of assets are assets that are individually owned, so one person's name, and have no beneficiaries attached. And so you think like life insurance or retirement accounts, those sort of things are going to go to the beneficiaries designated on those assets outside of the will. So, it's just something you have to kind of play with when you do your will is make sure your assets line up appropriately with that document. And then if someone dies without a will, which was the other part of your question, it goes back to what are the assets? How are they owned? What's the value of them? If we have to go through any kind of probate court process happens when you have a will and when you don't have a will. That's a big misconception too. And so in the event we don't have a will, there are these really funky rules that apply. They're called intestacy rules, and they're basically a built-in estate plan for people that pass away without a will. So your lovely government, your lovely state has your back on your estate plan, but I wouldn't recommend relying on that.
Yeah, so is it fair to say I have heard before, and I'm going to get off on a little tangent here, that if you do not have a prenuptial agreement, your prenuptial agreement is the state's laws where you live. Is it the same way for probate? Is it, or if you don't have a will or you don't have your documents in order, it diverts back to the state laws that are of your state? Is that fair?
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
And I would even add on to that, Anthony, and say that those state laws that dictate what happens to assets when you don't have a will are not very intuitive. That you think that if you're married and have kids, like everything would go to your spouse. Well, it's actually in Indiana, what they say is the intestacy rules say that if you die without a will and you're married and have kids, 50% of your estate goes to your spouse and 50% goes to your kids. And so there's a lot of little funky things in there that's why I kind of made the little quip of don't rely on them because it's not intuitive. It's not what you think is probably going to have happen.
Yeah, that's a sound bite that we'll probably extract and share to social media on its own, is that if you don't trust your government with your money, don't trust your government with all of your money. Give them some
Yes.
guidance
Yeah.
so that they can get it right on your behalf because you guided them through the process. And
Yeah.
so if there might be other types of documents that go alongside a last will and testament as you start to get things together, I just thought of this in the sense of what are the other things that people are thinking about at this sort of time in their life where they're getting these docs together?
Yeah. So there are, I'm going to say, kind of throw out three different documents that just are kind of just throw them out there and depending on someone's situation, just to explore them if they're appropriate. So first are like healthcare documents. So you think like healthcare power of attorney, healthcare representative, living will declaration. Though that set of documents is really just going to dictate who's making healthcare decisions for us and like what our healthcare wishes are if something happens like end of life wishes for example. So that's number one is healthcare documents. Number two are documents that are called financial power of attorneys. um, this is a document that kicks in, when you think of last will and testament, that kicks in after we pass away, right? Well, the possibility exists that something happens and we're actually still living. So you think you get in a car accident or you develop some sort of cognitive impairment. We need to have some document to put someone in a position to make legal and financial decisions for us while we're living, and that's that financial power of attorney. Super important document. The last document that I want to mention is any kind of like trust planning. So whether it's revocable trust planning, asset protection trust planning, those make sense for different people. They also don't make sense for some people. But I would be doing, this episode a disservice if I didn't kind of throw those out just to kind of toss them in people's brains.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to make sure that we touched on that because when we're thinking about getting all of these sorts of affairs in order, there are different aspects and different directions that you can come from the question. And then, so if I'm thinking about this, where in this realm of documents might I find, maybe a parent of mine has a situation where they pass away suddenly and I had found myself, I've never had a conversation with what they want me to do with their remains.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we've not had the discussion that they've purchased a piece of real estate that fits the box.
Yep.
Maybe we've not had the conversation that they want to go be spread out on the seaboard of their favorite place to vacation. Is there a paper trail for that in most circumstances? Because that's a question that I feel like a lot of people struggle with because they don't want to have that conversation because it's a tough conversation to have. It's
It
a
is.
conversation that suggests that you're mom or dad is going to die. Nobody wants to talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. I actually did an like a whole episode on this very topic on my podcast just about a month ago, and it's really about how to navigate bringing this whole topic up with our parents, with our aging loved ones. And there's no one size fits all answer to that. You know, sometimes our family members and our loved ones are really open to having this conversation. Sometimes, you know, you can imagine some people even close to us that, you know, if you bring this up, you're going to tick them off. They're going to shove you away. And so it really kind of depends on the person, the personality, the relationships involved. But at the end of the day, you know, it's their decision whether to act and make these kind of plans and put their wishes on paper. When they don't, someone has to clean it up. And so I also help a lot of families navigate the cleanup world, and that's just the unfortunate reality of people when they don't do any kind of planning. A little insider tip, you know, Anthony and I, of course, are based out of Indiana. I don't know if you have any you know, viewers outside of Indiana. I'm sure you
Mhm.
do. But like Indiana, for example, has a document called a funeral planning declaration.
Okay.
And that's a really easy document that you can just kind of throw down your wishes, your general wishes on, you know, whether you want to be cremated or buried, or, you know, you really want this song to play at your, you know, funeral or whatever. And that's kind of a happy medium between like doing nothing and doing absolute like full-fledged like funeral planning. Um, so I wanted to throw that out there that, you know, specifically with the example that you gave, that there's sometimes some happy medium sources out there too.
Yeah, and so with that declaration, does that get sandwiched into all of the rest of your documents and
Hmm.
gets signed and witnessed and the whole bit?
Yep, yep,
And then I think there might be some misconceptions among folks looking to get this done. I know that this was a misconception of mine. If I go and I get my will completed, I was always under the assumption that I needed to go and get this recorded at the county or something like that to etch this in stone that these are my demands, this is what's going to happen. And I found out that it's not the case, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah. A lot of people think these documents are recorded or filed somewhere. I know there are some states that allow for it but don't require it. Indiana doesn't even really allow for it. Like if I walked into the courthouse and said, "Hi, I'm here to file Anthony's will," they'd be like, "What are you doing here, Jenny? Why are you what?" So here in Indiana, we don't require it, and it's not standard practice. It is standard practice when you have a will after you pass away to file it with the court, but really that's about the only time. You don't have to file it anywhere. Um, it just kind of depends on the state in which the person resides.
Sure, sure. And so let's take the conversation in a little bit of a different direction. There seem to be more and more in the podcast world specifically, the personal development space is full of advertisers, and the
Yeah,
majority of them have different products or services that may be beneficial to you in one capacity of life or another. Some of these have seemed to be, maybe it's my reticular activating system getting triggered by these things, but I'm hearing a lot of companies that will help you through this process that maybe don't necessarily have an office setting like you're sitting in right now. And
yeah.
I know that you have a vested interest in the answer to this question, but I would like you to talk a little bit maybe about the differences in types of service, the differences in price points between these online platforms that are looking to do these documents for you basically through a questionnaire and it spits out a document versus talking to somebody like you who has a face to relate to.
Yeah, yeah, I actually think you may be surprised by my answer.
Okay.
And I think it's probably an example of, you know, just me kind of being, you know, I'm 35. I'm, you know, somewhat like on the young side of my career, right? And so I tend to approach things with a little bit more flexible approach than I think people on the tail end of their career.
Mhm.
So I actually have nothing bad to say about online platforms providing estate planning services. In fact, a few of them have actually reached out directly to me and had me like comb through their Indiana versions of their documents, and they've like compensated me for my time to basically have me redline their documents and say, like, this doesn't make sense here in Indiana. You should add this over here. Not all of them, of course, and I don't want to name drop and, that sort of thing. But so I know the ones that I've combed through that they were my eyeballs on those documents. I think the biggest difference, which will not come as a surprise at all, is that, estate planning it really should be looked at as a relationship and not a transaction. It should be looked at as a service and not a product. And I think that those estate planning platforms, they are getting more people to do their estate planning, which I will always be a fan of. I will always advocate for. My concern is that they don't provide that level of service and counseling that an attorney is going to be able to give. So, I when I'm meeting with people, I'm like, okay, well, we've got to get this, asset over here. We need to change the ownership or change the beneficiary to support this overall plan. That's just not going to exist in those platforms. And so it's kind of the classic, like, that's just the risk you have to be willing to take, or
Mhm.
the you get what you pay for kind of saying. So I am not going to say anything bad about them, because they're going to be out there, and as if I put my business owner hat on, I have to figure out a way to work with them and not work against them. And so that's why I chose to, say, like, yeah, I'm happy to comb through your documents and get them in better order. Um, and at the same time, I think there is such an immense value that someone should place on the counseling, the conversation, and the relationship that an attorney is going to provide.
Yeah, that's a helpful way to frame this. And to that point, if more people are doing this, it's all the better. You alluded to earlier in the discussion that virtually half of our country, if you go walk through the grocery store, half of these people don't have these documents in place. So if
Yeah.
these platforms can help, shift that a little bit better, all the better for everyone involved. So
Hmm.
to continue these thoughts, you have these documents that you either through one platform or another, you get yourself a plan in place. What do you then do with those documents? Because I believe these are paper documents. So what
Yeah.
happens here? And then I have to inject into this episode, what happens when somewhere down the road you can't find them?
Oh Lord, yeah. Okay, so I'll start with the first question.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start with, because if someone zones out for the other part of my blabbing, I want them to hear this loud and clear. Do not put them in a bank safety deposit box. Banks do not like to let people in to those safety deposit boxes when you're not there. And guess when these estate planning documents are getting activated? When you can't be there. So
Yep.
do not put them there. There are kind of two different schools of thoughts. There's some attorneys that will hold on to the original documents. And basically, that's kind of their checks and balances, and the family will call them when something happens. I take the mindset of, I want my clients to have the original documents. I, of course, maintain copies of them. I maintain electronic copies of them. But at the end of the day, my personal estate planning documents are in a fireproof safe at home.
Mhm.
I think that is maybe another more logistical and realistic tip, is put them somewhere that's intuitive. My grandmother used to put, like, a whole bunch of important financial stuff in her freezer. So I'd, like, go in to get, like, an ice cream cone, and, like, a financial statement would drop out. Don't do that. That's not intuitive. Do something intuitive. Invest in a safe. Put them in your office. Don't put them, like, in the back of your closet. um, so put them in a spot that's intuitive, and perhaps invest into something like a fireproof safe. Now, if you can't find them, I also did a podcast episode on this.
Okay.
Um, Unfortunately, because actually the last question, or maybe two questions ago, because our state doesn't, you know, force us to, like, hand over our estate planning documents and file or record them anywhere. There's no big brother out there. So, I've had plenty of families that will come to my office. We did not do their documents, but they're needing help in this exact situation. A good place to always start is if you can figure out the attorney that drafted those documents. That's always a good place to start. Um, Even if we can find copies and not the originals, that's okay too. I've worked on a case where we flat couldn't find them. And what ends up happening is we basically have to show our cards, go to the court, open up a probate case, and basically say like, we don't have anything to give you. Like, we know they did a will. We can't put our fingers on it, put our hands on it. Um, and we're kind of back to those intestacy rules they talked about. So it's not ideal at all. So anything you can do to set your family up for success later is going to be best.
Got it. So if I hear you correctly, it sounds to me like if you lose the will and you really cannot replace it, it is as if you did not make one.
Essentially, yeah. And there's some the person that you kind of that's taking the lead, the executor, the personal representative, or the trustee. I of course will have them do their due diligence of like, have you checked with their financial advisor? Have you checked with their CPA? Does anyone have it? So you have to like you have to like at least try, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And in those pleadings to the court, like I will spell out like, hey, I did this, I did this, I did this, and I did this. We still can't find it, and now we're showing our cards to you.
Got it. Got it. And so
Hmm.
before we wrap up, I want to take a detour back to a statement that we talked about a little bit earlier when it comes to retirement accounts and things that have specific named beneficiaries. You suggested that those items sit outside of the purview of a last will and testament because those are documents that have a defined expectation as to who will be the beneficiary of them. And I think that it's important to hit on in this video that if you have retirement accounts and different things like that that have named beneficiaries, and you have not looked at those documents in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you might want to be looking at them because life is long and what you had decided upon when you were 25 may not be true at 65. Have you seen things of that
Hmm.
nature?
Oh, Anthony, have I? I actually have a case right now. It's about to close up, but super long story short, a gentleman passed away right before he passed away. It was unexpected that he passed. He had just gotten divorced, and part of the divorce decree was they were supposed to update their beneficiaries. Well, he didn't. And so his life insurance retirement accounts went to his ex-wife. And so the kids, of course, sued her to basically recover some of those funds. So beneficiary designations are of critical importance, and you should absolutely keep an eye on them. I would even check them like annually. I mean, because I've even known financial institutions when they like swallow each other up or they merge with other, sometimes those beneficiary designations drop.
Hmm.
So absolutely keep an eye on those things. That is a huge, huge, huge problem. A lot of people, you know, there's a huge problem I see. I'm constantly cleaning up beneficiary designation mistakes.
Good tip there. And so to sum up the actionable items for this episode, make sure that your beneficiaries are up to date. If you don't have estate planning documents, start to look toward what that means to you. Get in touch with somebody like a Jenny. Get in touch with a platform that Jenny has probably written the documents for anyway.
Mhm.
One of the different circumstances there. But if you are one of the 50% of the people roaming around the grocery store who does not have these documents in place, you are missing out on the last opportunity to tell your family that you love them.
Love that.
Yeah. So I can't let you go quite yet, Jenny. I've got some rapid fire questions for you, known as the how to cues. Are you ready for them?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Fantastic. The first question is, what is the best book that you have read in the last 12 months?
Oh, the best book. Why my brain instantly went to law school, like caused me to not like reading. So I'm actually not a big reader. The only time I ever read, honestly, Anthony, are John Grisham books.
Okay.
So I think the last one that I read was The Boys of Boxley. I think I just like John Grisham because I think he is a lawyer, and if he's not, he just always writes about lawyers. So yeah.
All right, that counts. So, second question, what is one podcast that you subscribe to that is not yours or is not this channel?
Oh, so I work with a business coach that works specifically with law firm owners. And it's called Velocity Work. It's the Law Firm Owner Podcast. Um, I like it so much. I like it because it speaks to me. It speaks to me and the challenges I face as a business owner, not as an attorney. So I faithfully listen to their podcast. It's weekly. It actually drops the same day as my podcast. So yeah, so Velocity Work Law Firm Owner Podcast is what I listen to.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Next question. What is one app on your phone that you could not live without?
Whew, um, probably, sadly, probably my email.
It
Yeah,
happens. It
yes,
happens.
I would say my email because um I take it very seriously. My level of client service, my level of involvement with my team, the health of my law firm, and like my email is what keeps me able to, as long as the email's quiet, that's what it is. That's what is gives me the ability to put my head on my pillow at night and know that I'm doing okay.
I get it. I do. What is one item that you have purchased recently for plus or minus $100 that has brought you an extreme amount of value?
Um, well, we're coming off of Christmas, so there's a lot of items that I purchased over $100. You know what? I'm gonna say, my husband and I, we don't have kids of our own, and so our nieces and nephews are like our like life besides our animals.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the recent purchases, which is a pretty big one that I'm really proud of and I'm really excited, is we are taking my nephew on a trip through his school. It's a study abroad trip to Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And traveling has been the best thing that I've basically ever done, besides, marrying my husband and becoming a lawyer. Traveling is like the best thing I've ever done. And I want to give that gift to him to be able to see the world. So, yeah, we're going in July of 2024.
Very cool. Very cool. So the final question is where can people find out or connect with you more?
So, professionally, the firm is Indiana Estate and Elder Law. So, we have an awesome website,
Mhm.
which is not the case for a lot of lawyers. We do have an awesome website. But more personally, I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm actually really much more active on Twitter. Or I guess it's X now. It's X. So Jenny Rozelle, ROZ is in zebra, ELLE. And then, of course, my podcast, Legal Tea, is on every major podcast platform.
Outstanding. We will link to all of the above so people can stay in touch with you, reach out to you if they need your help, and just ultimately just engage with you because you're dropping a whole bunch of content that'll help people. And so
Yeah.
wanted to huddle with you for this episode. I appreciate you being on, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm sure we could go for another 30 minutes or so, but we'll cut it off now.
Perfect. That's going to bring this episode of the show to a close. A special thanks to Jenny for joining me, and hopefully you got some value out of this. Follow her on the different platforms she mentioned, and check out the Legal Tea podcast. It's really cool. You can get some insight, and it's not just straight data at you. She goes through examples of celebrities, things like that. Fun episodes to check out as well. So follow her, get some information, and get this stuff done. It is important. It is that last opportunity to tell your family that you love them. As always, you can subscribe to the channel to be the first to know about new content each and every Wednesday in long form, a lot more frequently than that in short form, just for fun. And you can engage with me in the comments if you have any ideas for future topics on the show, if you have any questions about this episode or anything like that. I will engage with you there. If you are looking to transact real estate in the Indianapolis market, I can help you do that. Get in touch with me, indydwell.com, or in the comments. Either one is fine. As always, love to shout out my friends at the Circle City Success Podcast. Drew, Matt, and Jason are doing cool things in the Indianapolis market as well. Check them out on the podcast player of your choice. That's going to bring this one to the close. Anthony Drew Gary here, signing off.